This video is a response to New Gamer regarding does Colossians 1:15 prove that Jesus was created? The simple answer is yes. Jesus is Jehovah's literal firstborn. First, I would like to point out how New Gamer misrepresents what Jehovah's Witnesses say about the Greek word prototikos. Jehovah's Witnesses never claimed prototikos means first created. We believe what it says, that Jesus is prototikos, the firstborn of all creation. I like what New Gamer said, to look through context, and through context I'm going to demonstrate how Paul, the writer of the book of Colossians, meant what he said about the Greek word prototikos. He didn't use a word the way New Gamer is suggesting, that firstborn meant lordship, excellence, and dignity. Absolutely not. Let's read it through context using the NIV Bible to see what Paul meant. Colossians 1:15 through 18. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn of all creation. For by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things were created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. And he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning, the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. Verse 15 automatically denies Jesus is God because it says that he's the image of God, not that he is God himself. The Greek word image, icon, denotes likeness, representation. Jesus is the very stamp of God, but not God himself, nevertheless. Then the verse continues how Jesus is the firstborn of all, firstborn over all creation, using the NIV wording. Yet the word over is not in the Greek. But still, the case can still be proved that Paul meant firstborn in a literal sense. But before we continue, does prototikos mean lordship, excellence, and dignity, as New Gamer claims? Consider Vine's expository dictionary of Old and New Testament words. It states, firstborn is used of Christ as born of the Virgin Mary. And it quotes Luke chapter 2 verse 7. And it does continue, in his relationship to the Father, expressing his priority to and preeminence over creation, not in the sense of being the first to be born. It is used occasionally of the superiority of position in the Old Testament, the prohibition being against the evil of assigning the privileged position to the firstborn, to one born subsequently to the first child. So this reference is showing how firstborn can mean priority, preeminence, and superiority of position. But it can also mean, in the literal sense, use of Christ as born of the Virgin Mary. Let's read Luke chapter 2 verse 7. And she gave birth to her firstborn, prototikos, a son. She wrapped him in cloths and placed him in a manger, because there was no room for them in the inn. That's the exact Greek word that is used in Colossians. Also consider Romans chapter 8 verse 29. For those God foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed in the likeness of his Son, that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. This is referring how some in a group will be born later in time to be in the likeness of the Son, to become rulers with Christ, as I believe the anointed one. And that's referenced in Romans chapter 8 verse 17. Every time firstborn is referenced to Jesus, it's never implying priority, preeminence, or superiority. So now that we've seen Jesus isn't God, but the image of God, and he is the literal firstborn of creation, verse 16 states, for by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things were created by him and for him. It's interesting to know that the second word by him is from the Greek word dia. Dia means as the intermediate and sustaining agent. Word picture in the New Testament. This indicates Jesus wasn't the initiator of creation, because the one he is the image of created through him, dia, Some would suggest that Dia is also referred to the Father. So what's the big deal? Well, at Romans 11:36 it does say that, for from him and through him and to him are all things. To him be the glory forever. Amen. But the difference is no other person is being referred to in this verse as creating through God, because he is the initiator, whereas in Jesus is always referred to as the intermediate agent. So Jesus isn't the initiator, that is the one creating, but it's creating through him, and that is his God and Father, Jehovah. Verse 17, he is before all things, and in him all things hold together. Jesus being before all things doesn't propose a problem, because this is referring how he is before all creation, coinciding with the context in verse 15. He is the firstborn of all creation. And the one who he is the image of existed before him, because God isn't in the image of Christ. No, but Christ is the image of God. It's like having a child. If the child is the image of their parents, but the parents existed before their child. Verse 18, he is the head of the body, the church. He is the beginning and the firstborn from among the dead, so that in everything he might have the supremacy. Now verse 18 brings home the point what Paul really meant regarding the Greek word prototikos, because he stated Jesus was the firstborn from among the dead. He wasn't stating that Jesus was lordship, excellent in dignity of the dead. He meant he was the first to be resurrected from the dead, to have immortality, because there was none before him. Same thing with verse 15. He is the firstborn of all creation, because there was nothing that God created before Jesus. Jesus is the firstborn of all of God's creation. So if Paul meant prototikos was a literal first in verse 18, meaning there was none that was resurrected before Jesus to have immortality because he was the first, why would he mean something differently in verse 15? And in the event if Paul was trying to convey to us that the firstborn did mean lordship, excellence, dignity, and supremacy, why didn't he use it a third time in verse 18 to be consistent when he said, so that in everything he might have supremacy? The Greek word there is protoio, and it means to be first, to be preeminent, hold the first place, to hold the highest rank in a group, be first, have first place. Paul knew the appropriate words to use. If he was indicating to his audience that firstborn was the way New Gamer was trying to explain to us, he would have been consistent, using it a third time. But he didn't. He used the word differently with two different meanings. And you notice too that he didn't use prototikos and protoio interchangeably. It's clear, as I just demonstrated, that Jesus is God's literal firstborn, as Paul believed.